The summer of 1878 had been brutal to Colorado Territory, with drought turning the grasslands to tinder and tensions between white settlers and the northern Cheyenne reaching a breaking point. Thomas McKenna stood on the porch of his trading post, watching dust devils dance across the parched earth while the sun beat down mercilessly from a cloudless sky. At 38, he had been running this isolated outpost for nearly a decade, serving as a bridge between two worlds that seemed determined to destroy each other. Thomas was not a large man, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to read people and situations with deadly accuracy. His trading post sat at the crossroads of several important trails, making it a natural stopping point for travelers of all kinds. Cavalry patrols heading to Fort Collins, wagon trains bound for California, and yes, Cheyenne hunting parties moving between their summer and winter camps. He had built his reputation on fairness and neutrality, treating all customers with equal respect regardless of the color of their skin or the uniform they wore. The building itself was a sturdy log structure with thick walls and narrow windows, designed more like a fortress than a store. Inside, the shelves were stocked with everything from ammunition and tools to bolts of cloth and bags of sugar. Thomas took pride in maintaining good relationships with both the army and the local tribes, walking a careful line between two sides that viewed each other with increasing suspicion and hostility. But today felt different. There was a tension in the air that had nothing to do with the weather, a sense that something was building toward an explosion that would leave blood on the ground and families mourning their dead. Thomas had been expecting trouble ever since word came down from Denver that the government was planning to force the Cheyenne onto reservations in Indian Territory, far from their ancestral lands and sacred sites. It was late afternoon when Captain Harrison arrived with his patrol of 20 soldiers, their blue uniforms dark with sweat and dust from the long ride. Thomas knew Harrison by reputation, a career officer who had served with distinction during the Civil War, but who had developed a particular hatred for Indians after his younger brother was killed in a raid near Kansas City. "McKenna," Harrison said as he dismounted, his voice curt and businesslike. "We need supplies and information." Thomas nodded, gesturing toward the store. "Both are available, Captain. What kind of information are you looking for?" Harrison's eyes were hard as flint as he looked around the empty landscape. "There's been trouble north of here. A Cheyenne war party hit a homestead near Bent's Creek, killed the whole family, including 2 children. We're tracking them, and their trail leads this way." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. He had heard nothing of any raid, and in his experience, stories of Indian attacks often grew in the telling, sometimes sprouting from thin air when someone needed an excuse for violence. "How do you know it was Cheyenne?" he asked carefully. Harrison's face flushed with anger. "Because we found arrows, and because there were witnesses before they died. Don't try to protect them, McKenna. I know you do business with the savages, but this time they've gone too far." As the soldiers resupplied, Thomas listened to their talk and felt his unease growing. The men were angry, looking for someone to blame for all the frustrations and fears of frontier life. They spoke of the dead family in graphic detail, working themselves into the kind of righteous fury that often led to massacres of innocent people. "We know they're headed for the winter camps in the mountains," Harrison said as he prepared to leave. "But if they come through here, if you see any of them, you send word immediately. Anyone caught helping hostile Indians will be treated as an enemy of the United States." The threat was clear enough, but Thomas simply nodded. After the soldiers rode away, he stood in the gathering dusk and wondered what fresh hell was about to be unleashed on this already troubled land. The answer came just before dawn. Thomas was awakened by the sound of a horse approaching at full gallop, hooves pounding against the hard earth with desperate urgency. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, peering out into the grey pre-dawn light to see a lone rider racing toward his trading post as if the devil himself were in pursuit. The rider was a young Cheyenne woman, perhaps 18 or 19 years old, mounted on a paint horse that was lathered with sweat and breathing hard. She wore traditional clothing decorated with intricate beadwork, but Thomas could see that her dress was torn and stained with what looked like blood. Her long black hair streamed behind her as she rode, and even from a distance he could see the desperation in her posture. She pulled up short in front of the trading post and half fell from her horse, her legs barely able to support her weight. Thomas could see now that she was wounded, a bullet graze along her left arm that had bled through the bandage she had improvised from strips of her dress. "Help!" she gasped in English, her accent thick but her meaning clear. "Please, they come. Kill all." Thomas looked quickly around the empty landscape, then opened his door and gestured her inside. Whatever was happening, this girl was in desperate trouble, and his conscience wouldn't let him turn her away. Once inside, she collapsed into a chair, her face pale from blood loss and exhaustion. Thomas quickly bolted the door and moved to close the shutters, then turned his attention to her wound. "Let me look at that," he said gently, indicating her injured arm. She pulled away instinctively, her dark eyes wide with fear and suspicion. Thomas held up his hands to show he meant no harm, then slowly reached for the medical supplies he kept behind the counter. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, "but that needs to be cleaned and bandaged properly, or it's going to get infected." She watched him warily as he approached with clean cloth and a bottle of whiskey, but she didn't try to run. Thomas worked carefully, cleaning the wound and applying fresh bandages while she bit her lip to keep from crying out. "What's your name?" he asked as he worked. "Mape," she replied quietly. "Means sky in my language. I'm Thomas. What happened to you, Mape? Who's chasing you?" Her story came out in halting English mixed with gestures and occasional words in Cheyenne. Her father was a war chief named Tall Bear, and their band had been camped peacefully near a stream about 20 miles north when the soldiers attacked just before dawn. There had been no warning, no attempt at negotiation, just sudden violence that had left dozens of her people dead or dying. "My father, he fight to give others time to run," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But soldiers, they have many guns. They shoot anyone who move, even children, even old ones who cannot fight." Thomas felt a cold rage building in his chest. This wasn't a military action against hostile warriors. This was a massacre of innocent people, the kind of atrocity that would be covered up and forgotten while the newspapers celebrated another victory against the savage Indians. "How did you get away?" he asked. Mape touched her wounded arm. "Soldier shoot, think I dead. I play dead until dark, then take horse and run. Father tell me if trouble come, ride to trading post, find Thomas McKenna. He say you good man, help people who need help." Thomas was surprised to learn that Tall Bear knew him by name, though he supposed his reputation for fairness had spread further than he realized. Now that reputation was about to be put to the ultimate test. "They're following you," he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded miserably. "Captain with yellow hair, he very angry, say kill all Cheyenne. He look for me, want to finish what he start." Harrison. Of course it would be Harrison, using the supposed raid at Bent's Creek as an excuse to attack the first Indians he could find. Thomas had no doubt that Tall Bear's band had had nothing to do with any homestead raid. They were peaceful people who had been trying to avoid exactly this kind of confrontation. "Listen to me, Mape," Thomas said urgently. "There's a hidden cellar under the store. You need to hide there until this is over." She shook her head stubbornly. "Cannot hide while my people die. Must fight. You can't fight them alone, and you can't help anyone if you're dead. Your father sent you here because he knew I would protect you. Let me do that." The cellar was a small underground room that Thomas had built during the early days of his trading post, designed as a secure storage area for his most valuable goods. It was accessed through a hidden trapdoor behind the counter, concealed so well that even careful searchers might miss it. Mape reluctantly agreed to hide, but only after Thomas promised to help her find any other survivors from her band. As he helped her down into the cellar, Thomas reflected grimly on what he was risking. If Harrison found her here, Thomas would be branded a traitor, possibly court-martialed and executed. But looking at this brave young woman who had lost everything, he knew he had no choice. The soldiers arrived just after sunrise, their horses blowing hard from what had obviously been a long pursuit. Harrison dismounted with the grim satisfaction of a man who believed he was close to completing his mission. "McKenna," he called out, "open up! We're searching for a hostile who escaped from yesterday's action." Thomas opened the door with deliberate slowness, trying to project the image of a man who had just been awakened from sleep. "Captain, what can I do for you? We're tracking a wounded Cheyenne woman. Her trail leads straight here. Have you seen anyone?" Thomas met Harrison's gaze steadily. "I haven't seen any Indians since your patrol came through yesterday. Been quiet as a grave around here." Harrison studied his face carefully, looking for any sign of deception. "You wouldn't lie to me, would you, McKenna? You understand what happens to people who aid and comfort the enemy?" "I understand perfectly, Captain, but I'm telling you the truth. I haven't seen anyone." For a moment, Thomas thought Harrison might order a search anyway. The captain's hand rested on his sidearm, and several of his soldiers had moved to flanking positions around the trading post. But then one of the troopers called out from behind the building, "Captain, found fresh horse tracks leading toward the creek. Looks like she headed west." Harrison nodded grimly. "Mount up, boys. We'll catch her before she reaches the mountains." As the soldiers rode away, Thomas felt his knees go weak with relief, but he knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Harrison would be back, and next time he might not be so easily fooled. Thomas helped Mappy out of the cellar and gave her food and water while they discussed what to do next. She was adamant about trying to find other survivors from her band, but Thomas knew that area would be crawling with soldiers for days to come. "There's another way," he said finally. "I know people, traders, prospectors, even some army officers who might be willing to help, but it's going to take time to organize, and you need to heal before you do anything else." Mape stayed hidden in the trading post for 3 days, while Thomas carefully reached out to his network of contacts. The story he pieced together was even worse than he had feared. Harrison's patrol had indeed attacked Tallbear's peaceful camp, but they hadn't been acting on orders from higher command. The captain had used the dubious story of the Bent's Creek raid to justify a freelance massacre, hoping to advance his career by bringing in Cheyenne scalps and prisoners. Most of Tallbear's band had been killed or scattered, but Thomas learned that a small group of survivors had made it to the mountains. Mahpe's father was among them, badly wounded but alive. The challenge was getting her safely to the survivors without running into any of the patrols that were still scouring the countryside. On the 4th night, Thomas woke to see flickering lights in the distance. Not the harsh glare of electric lights or the steady glow of lanterns, but the warm, dancing flames of campfires, lots of them, arranged in a wide circle around his trading post. He grabbed his rifle and moved cautiously to the window, his heart pounding as he tried to count the fires. There had to be at least 50 of them, maybe more, creating a ring of light that stretched for hundreds of yards in every direction. "Mapi," he called softly. "Come look at this." She joined him at the window, and Thomas saw her face transform with wonder and relief as she took in the sight before them. "My people," she whispered, "they come for me." As they watched, figures began to emerge from the darkness beyond the fires, Cheyenne warriors on horseback, moving with the ghostly silence that had made them legendary among both their enemies and allies. But these weren't hostile war parties bent on destruction. They rode with a dignity and formality that spoke of ceremony rather than combat. Thomas and Mape stepped outside to meet them, and Thomas felt his breath catch as he recognized the lead rider. It was Tallbear himself, the war chief whose daughter Thomas had been hiding. The man was clearly wounded. His left arm hung in a sling made from strips of hide, and Thomas could see the careful way he held himself in the saddle. But his eyes were alert and intelligent, and there was no hostility in his manner as he approached. "Thomas McKenna," Tallbear said in careful English. his voice carrying the formal cadence of ceremony. "My daughter tells me you risked your life to save hers when the soldiers came hunting." Thomas felt suddenly self-conscious, aware that he was surrounded by nearly 200 Cheyenne warriors, all of them watching this encounter with intense interest. "I did what anyone should do," he said simply. Tall Bear smiled, and Thomas was struck by the dignity and warmth in the man's weathered features. "No," the chief said firmly, "not anyone. You chose to help when you could have chosen safety. You protected my child when you could have protected only yourself. This is not the action of just anyone. This is the action of a true friend to the people." The war chief dismounted carefully, wincing as the movement jarred his wounded arm. "Among my people, when someone saves a child's life, especially at great risk to themselves, they become family. You are no longer just Thomas McKenna the trader. You are Thomas McKenna, brother to Tall Bear, uncle to all our children." What followed was unlike anything Thomas had ever experienced. The ceremony was conducted entirely in Cheyenne, with Tall Bear speaking in the formal, rhythmic cadence of ritual, while the assembled warriors listened in respectful silence. Thomas couldn't understand the words, but he could feel the power and significance of what was happening. When the formal speeches were finished, the warriors began to approach one by one, each offering a gift and words of respect. A young brave presented him with a magnificent war lance, its shaft decorated with eagle feathers and intricate beadwork. An elder gave him a sacred pipe, explaining through gestures that it would ensure his words would always be heard with respect among the people. But it was Mahpe's gift that moved him most deeply. She approached carrying a shirt made from the finest buckskin, decorated with quillwork that must have taken months to complete. The design depicted the sun rising over mountains, with a single figure standing between two groups of people. "This is you," she explained as she presented it to him. "Standing between our worlds, bringing light where there was darkness, building bridges where there were only walls." As Thomas accepted each gift, he felt the weight of what was happening. These weren't just presents, they were symbols of acceptance, tokens of a bond that would last for life. He was being formally adopted into the Cheyenne tribe, made a brother to people who had every reason to hate and distrust all white men. "Why?" he asked Tall Bear, when the gift-giving was finished. "Why go to such risk, bringing so many people here? Harrison and his soldiers could return at any time." The war chief's expression grew serious. "Because honor demands it," he said simply. "Because when someone risks everything to save our children, we do not forget. Because in these dark times, when hatred seems to poison everything it touches, we must celebrate those who choose love over fear." Tall Bear gestured toward the ring of fires that still burned bright in the darkness. "These fires are not for war, Thomas McKenna. They are the fires of family, the lights that guide lost children home. Tonight, you are one of those children, and we welcome you into the circle of the people." The celebration continued through the night, with songs and stories shared around the fires. Thomas found himself passed from group to group, with warriors and elders, eager to meet the white man who had become their brother. Language barriers meant little. Respect and gratitude translated perfectly through gestures and expressions. As dawn approached, Tall Bear took Thomas aside for a private conversation. "There is something you must know," the chief said quietly. "The soldier chief with yellow hair, he will not forget what happened here. He knows you helped my daughter, and he will want revenge." Thomas had been thinking the same thing. Harrison wasn't the type to forget or forgive, and Thomas's interference had probably cost the captain the promotion he had been seeking. There would be consequences, and they would probably be severe. "I can take care of myself," Thomas said. Tall Bear shook his head. "No man should face such danger alone. From this day forward, you are under the protection of the Cheyenne people. If this soldier chief threatens you, if anyone threatens you, you send word to us. We do not abandon family." The offer was both touching and practical. Having the protection of Tall Bear's warriors would definitely make Harrison think twice about any direct action against Thomas. But it also meant that Thomas was now irrevocably tied to the Cheyenne cause, marked as a friend to people that the government considered enemies. As the sun rose and the fires were extinguished, the warriors began to fade back into the landscape as silently as they had come. But before they left, Tall Bear had one final gift for Thomas. "My daughter wishes to stay with you for a time," he said. "Not as a refugee, but as a student. She wants to learn the white man's ways, to become a bridge between our peoples, like you have become. Will you teach her?" Thomas looked at Mape, seeing the determination and intelligence in her dark eyes. The request made sense. If peace was ever going to be possible between whites and Indians, it would require people who could understand and communicate with both sides. "I'd be honored," Thomas said. And so began a partnership that would last for years. Mape proved to be a quick student, mastering not just English, but also the complex skills of trade and diplomacy. She became Thomas's assistant and eventually his partner, helping to run the trading post while serving as an unofficial ambassador between the Cheyenne and the white settlements. Harrison did indeed try to cause trouble, accusing Thomas of treason and demanding a military investigation. But by then, word of what had really happened at Tall Bear's camp had reached higher authorities. The captain found himself facing a court-martial for conducting an unauthorized attack on peaceful Indians, and his career came to an abrupt and inglorious end. Thomas's trading post became famous throughout the territory as a place where all people were welcome, where disputes could be settled peacefully, and where the dream of coexistence between different cultures was actually being lived out on a daily basis. Travelers would come from hundreds of miles away just to see the white man who had been adopted by the Cheyenne, who wore traditional clothing alongside his regular attire, and who spoke both languages with equal fluency. Years later, when Thomas was an old man and Mape was a respected leader among her people, they would sometimes sit on the porch of the trading post in the evening and watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. They would talk about that night when 200 warriors had surrounded them with fires of welcome instead of weapons of war, about the ceremony that had transformed a simple act of compassion into a bond that would last for generations. "You changed everything," Mape would tell him, "not just for me, not just for my family, but for both our peoples. You showed that it was possible to choose courage over cowardice, love over hatred, unity over division." Thomas would always protest that he had simply done what felt right, but Mape would shake her head with the wisdom of someone who had lived through the transformation. "No," she would say firmly, "what you did was refuse to let fear make your choices for you. When they told you to hate us, you chose friendship. When they told you to abandon me, you chose protection. When they told you to stay silent, you chose to speak for justice. Those choices, they lit fires that are still burning today." The sacred shirt that Mape had given him hung in his bedroom for the rest of his life, carefully preserved as a reminder of the night that had changed everything. And when visitors asked about it, about the meaning of the intricate quill work that depicted a figure bringing light to two different worlds, Thomas would tell them the story of a young woman who had needed help and an old trader who had discovered that sometimes the greatest risks led to the greatest rewards. The story became legend among both peoples, told around campfires and kitchen tables, passed down through generations as proof that even in the darkest times, individual acts of courage could create circles of light that would spread far beyond their original source. It was a reminder that heroism often came in quiet moments, in the choice to help instead of hurt, to protect instead of profit, to build bridges instead of walls. In the end, that was Thomas's greatest legacy. Not the successful business he had built or the wealth he had accumulated, but the proof he had provided that human decency could triumph over prejudice. that love could indeed conquer fear, and that one man's choice to do the right thing could literally light fires of hope that would burn for generations to come.